I always recommend a liberal diet. So as long as you like the food and the food is, and you don't have a food allergy, eat all the
Hmm.
foods. Eat all the foods. And what we know too about food allergens is the most common food allergens, right? So there are 8 foods that cause about 90% of reactions in the U.S. So that's milk, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, wheat, and soy. And recently, sesame was added as the ninth most common
Hmm.
allergen. But all of those foods, if you think about them, those are all really nutritious foods, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, they're the foods that we
Yeah.
actually want to be eating more often. So I
Yeah.
always tell people, don't avoid those foods unless you have a problem with them when you're pregnant or when you're breastfeeding.
Sherry Coleman Collins, welcome to the Motherly Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
All right. I always like to kind of begin and ground these conversations in your worldview, your approach to motherhood. I'm curious, what do you think makes your approach to motherhood unique?
Well, I think, oftentimes I've told my friends that I'm sort of a crunchy light mom. I think I'm very focused on a lot of the basics, nutrition, sleep, physical health. But also, I think because I'm an older mom, I was almost 40 when my son was born. I think I came into motherhood with a whole lot of life
Mm.
experience that has helped me be a more patient mom, maybe with a little more holistic view of parenting.
Well, that's really interesting. Did you always think you were going to be a mom? Where did you grow up dreaming of it? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I wanted to be a mom, but my life just kind of took a meandering way. I had some false starts with relationships and
Hmm.
married my husband later, and just kind of this is the way that my life unfolded. I was very focused on education and a career, and just kind of had I think, like many people, just again a meandering kind of path of my life, and motherhood just came later than I expected.
Mm. So tell me more about how that maturity that you brought to motherhood you think shaped maybe your intentionality,
Mhm.
or maybe even the ways that you were more willing to be flexible on some things you might have been dogmatic about, if you had become a mother earlier.
Yeah, I think that's all true. I mean, I think for me, coming into motherhood, it was something I waited a long time for. So I absolutely wanted to be a mom. So I was able to, and still, I feel like I'm able to put parenting into the right perspective as part of my life. It's a really
Mm,
important part of my life. It isn't all of my life, but it's
mm,
a really important part of my life. And I would say the most important part of my life right now, because my son is still young, he's only 8. So we still have a lot of one-on-one time, a lot of he needs a lot of my time and attention. And I'm
mm.
able to put it into the proper perspective with regard to my professional life, right? So I'm still a professional, I'm still very active and engaged, but I'm able to prioritize my relationship with him. And I don't feel guilty about it like I think a lot of my younger counterparts who are still really working hard on their career, they really struggle with the balancing act of mothering and working. And I feel like I'm a little bit more able, because I was already pretty accomplished before I became a mom. It was easier
Mm-hmm.
for me to know that, there'll always be time to make more money. There'll always be time to build my business. But this time with my son is going to go by really fast, and it will be really short in the long game of life.
What has that looked like in practice for you? So I'm curious, what kind of boundaries have you set in order to be more fully present with your son? Given the reality that you were maybe more senior, more experienced, more advanced in your career, and maybe felt more comfortable setting those boundaries. But what are they at a practical level?
Sure. I mean, I think that one thing is, and this is something that I don't want to even suggest that I came in as an expert, right? I mean, it's still something I'm working on. I feel like I've gotten a lot better at it over the 8 years that I've been
Mm-hmm.
parenting. But I think, for me, it's learning to and being really comfortable saying no to things, you know? So projects come along, opportunities come along. I have passions that I want to follow. And in some cases, I've had to start those. And then I realize they don't work in our life right now, and I've had to
Mm,
step away. And sometimes that's been hard, saying no to projects or going to my colleagues and saying, after I've said yes to something, backing up and saying, what, I've really realized this doesn't work in our family. It doesn't work in my life right now. I'm really sorry. I know it's going to disappoint you. But in the grand scheme of things, if I have to disappoint somebody, I don't want it to be my son. I don't want it to be my husband. I want it to be somebody who's outside of our family, because
Mm,
those are the most important relationships that I'm negotiating.
mm. I love all of that so much. But as you pointed out, some people are in situations where they don't have a choice, right? They need to work for financial reasons or logistic reasons. But when we do have options, I think knowing that, other mothers are really empowered and, unapologetic in saying, this isn't right for us right now. For me personally, I've noticed I'm realizing there will be a horizon of my own career 10 years from now, 20 years from now. I don't all have to jam it in right this year,
Yes.
even. It just feels really good to hear you say that.
Yeah, I think that, I often talk to my friends and colleagues who are a little behind me in age, right? And I always like to remind them that, your career is going to span a long time, but your time mothering young children is really short. It's
Mm,
really short. And you're never going to get to the end of your life and think to yourself, gosh, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. Or gosh, I wish I'd, met that deadline or written that book. You're going to look back and you're going to think about all of the moments that you spent with your children celebrating
mhm,
birthdays and special days and simple days. Those are the days that I think really last forever in our minds.
mm. Yes. I love all of that. I recently stopped working full time here at Mother Leave for part time, and it's really made, and mostly I focus now on the podcast and some strategy for our platforms, but it has made space in my life with all the four kids that wasn't there before. One of the things that I'm actually doing is cooking a lot more, and that's been really therapeutic for me. Back to you, though. I know you, at one time, you and your husband were also foster parents, and I'm curious what that experience taught you, specifically about the definition of motherhood and parts of you that were mothering in maybe new ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I have often said that fostering is sort of like a refining fire of motherhood.
Mm,
It's you bring a child into your home that isn't your child, and you know from the beginning that it's not your child, and that the child will very likely leave your home at some point. So, and also at the same time, this child has a desperate need for attachment and love, and for all of the things that you can give them as a mother that they maybe have never had.
mhm,
And so I think that, it teaches you, or at least it has taught me, to love much more sacrificially, much more uninhibitedly, right?
mhm,
So loving for the sake of loving, for the sake of another person,
mhm,
without anything expected in return. When children come into foster care, they always have experienced trauma. Every child that comes into foster care has experienced trauma, because at the very least they've been separated from the people that love them, that have provided for them, that are, even if they're not safe, they're the only ones they've ever known. So in
mhm,
their minds, they're still safe. And so the children come in with all kinds of experiences, and they need a safe place to unwrap some of that. Even very young children, even a child who might not be verbal yet,
mhm,
still needs to be able to process that. And I think sometimes with the very young children, it's even harder because they can't verbalize it.
mhm,
So I think it's taught me, how to let go of my own expectations about mothering. And maybe it's also taught me to be a little bit more prepared for the heartaches that come from
mm,
mothering my own child.
mhm,
Because inevitably there's going to be disappointment and loss in relationships. It's just part of relationships.
mm. I love that unconditional love, like love for the sake of love. Love not because I want you to get into Harvard, love because you're a person and you're in front of me, and by caring for you, without expecting anything in return. Like that's the deepest meaning of what motherhood,
Mhm.
I think, is, in all circumstances. So thank you for that. I know we've talked a bit about your motherhood experience. I also want to talk about your area of professional expertise, which is nutrition, definitely nutrition with an emphasis on the realities of family life. And also, you're an expert in how to reduce allergies through nutrition. So, first of all, tell us how you got into nutrition science.
Sure. So I had always been interested in food and nutrition. I think I shouldn't say always. I definitely went through the teenage years where I survived on French fries and milkshakes, in high school.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, I actually, when I was about 17, I became a vegetarian. I
Mm.
had stumbled into a vegetarian grocery store and, read some very impactful literature about animal sort of the way that
Yeah.
animals are raised for food, and it affected me a lot. And I made some choices then about food. And then, since then, I went through a definite vegetarian phase, and then my eating sort of evolved and changed. And I had never really thought about becoming a dietitian, though. I didn't really think of it as a career choice. I don't know why. I just didn't really
Mm.
know about it. And then I went into fundraising, actually worked for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and met a dietitian who worked
Mm.
with patients who had CF. And I was just fascinated by the fact that food and nutrition can prevent and manage disease in such an impactful and profound way. And
Mm-hmm.
then I decided I wanted to become a dietitian and went back to school and then worked in lots of different areas. Clinical pediatrics was where I started, and I worked in IBD, so in inflammatory bowel disease and
Mm.
patients who had Crohn's and colitis, and I worked with children who had spina bifida, lots of different opportunities, and all along the way had a little bit of work in food allergies as well, because there's a bit of overlap in those populations.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went into school nutrition, and I worked in school nutrition for about 5 years, and eventually found my way to the National Peanut Board, where I worked on staff until my son was born. So you talk about sort of balancing. I went from working full time to working part time for
Mm-hmm.
them, as a contract employee after my son was born. And so now I work with the National Peanut Board and help educate people about food allergies, but also about nutrition in general.
Mm-hmm. You have a motto for your personal nutrition brand, which is to make the healthy bite the delicious bite. And it made me realize, as a vegetarian, I definitely still, even 20 years into eating, mostly plants, I definitely have a sense of healthy as boring and
Mm.
not flavorful. And it's sort of your personal mission within your own nutrition work to make the healthy bite the delicious bite. I'm curious, what's the story behind that motto, and how has that shaped your approach to nutrition?
Well, I think that you're not alone in thinking that. Many people have that same perspective. They think that healthy food must be boring. It has to taste like cardboard. It's it's not interesting at all. And I think that that's absolutely not representative of healthy eating around the world. Some of
Mm.
that is sort of an American idea, I think. If you look at Indian food, if you look at Mediterranean food, some of the healthiest foods in the world are some of the most flavorful and delicious foods.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I think that there are beautiful things about people, two-parent households and working and things like that. One of the things though that suffered is cooking at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of parents have had to outsource some of that. And that's not something to feel guilty about. I mean, it's a reality in modern day
Yeah.
life. And also, along with that, shift went a lot of cooking skills. And so
Mm.
people forgot how to cook, or maybe they never learned to begin with. And I think here in the US, we're sort of detached from food a lot of times in many different ways. And one of the ways is the flavorfulness of food. If we think that it has to be all about fat and salt, when the reality is there are so many ways to add flavor to food that make it delicious and exciting and beautiful, and also maintain that sense of health.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think you said at the beginning your approach to motherhood has been this crunchy light approach. Did I get that right? Okay. So
Yeah.
I think I know what you mean, but I'd like to hear a bit about how you take this crunchy light, largely healthy, largely plant based, but also flexible. How do you actually apply that in your life, not just as a dietitian, but as a mother?
Yeah, I think for me, that's really about looking at how can we again get sort of strip things down to the basics? How can we focus on what we know is healthy, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds, including peanuts. How can we make these foods the central part of how we eat? And how can we incorporate them into every meal and every snack? That's really sort of my mission always, is thinking about how can I incorporate these foods into every snack. And because I have such a long history of being a vegetarian, it's actually pretty easy for me to think about fruits and vegetables. They should just be part of every meal because they're super healthy and they're delicious and they're filling. They're full of vitamins and minerals, but they're also really pretty. So, it's kind of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I live in the real world. Like, sometimes I need to add things that make my life easier. Fruits and
Mm-hmm.
vegetables can sometimes take a little longer to prepare. So I
Mm-hmm.
might, go with a much more simple protein if we're going to have animal protein, or I might go with something very simple like tofu or cheese as sort of the protein source. And then we love sweets. We love dessert. We do not skip dessert in my house. We have dessert. We
Really?
enjoy ice cream. Yeah. I love to bake cookies. We still enjoy those things as well. So, there's sort of this 80-20 idea that many people have adopted. 80% of the time we eat whole, nutritious, delicious foods. And then 20% of the time we enjoy those sweets and treats and convenience foods that can kind of make our life a little easier, but also keep everybody in the house a little happier.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the dietitian, but sometimes in the nutrition world we say, like, earth people, this all the other people who are not dietitians don't always think like we do. So if we're
Mm-hmm.
going to feed them and keep them happy and keep them engaged, we have to also recognize that there are lots of reasons people eat, and it's not just about nutrition and fuel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, certainly in America, we're up against a lot of headwinds in the way that we think about food, the food choices that we have, our lifestyle. So, all of that speaks deeply to me. Also, in my family, so I have four kids. My youngest is really struggling to put on weight.
Mm,
So, I'm working with nutritionists, I'm working with this pediatrician. I'm constantly employing all kinds of strategies to help him gain more weight and be able to grow. My oldest has become incredibly picky and
mm,
pretty much only eats carbohydrates. And that's just two of the kids. Then I have two other, children who are at the moment, just a little bit easier to feed. But I know that that might change too as my other kids evolve. It's a part of a long feeding journey. Though that's my story. That's what I'm currently going through with feeding my family. I'm curious if you have had any, seasons of difficulty, of pickiness in your own motherhood and raising and feeding your son.
Absolutely, definitely. And with the fosters too. I mean, I think, sometimes kids will eat anything and sometimes kids won't eat anything. So I think you have to, again, sort of thinking about life, I think about nutrition the same way. It's the long game. It's not, one meal, one day, one week is not going to make or break anybody's nutritional well being or health. It's also not going to mess up their palate so much that they're not going to eat anything. So,
Mm-hmm.
and especially with toddlers, I think you said your youngest is two.
Mm-hmm.
Toddlers are known for jags. Same thing with kids who are starting to develop a little more autonomy, and
Mm-hmm.
teenagers are known for their bad eating
Mm-hmm.
habits, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think, we have to look at the long game, recognize that, we're trying to develop good habits for a lifetime. The first thing I would say to any mom, and the way that I approach it, is by setting an example. I show my son regularly what a healthy, balanced meal looks like. I show, he sees me eating fruits and vegetables. He sees my husband eating fruits and vegetables, not quite as often as I do, but he sees that modeled, right? That healthy sort of behavior and habits. And we always make it available. So again, every meal and every snack has some fruits and vegetables. And then, we build out around from that. And one thing we don't allow is food battles, especially not at the table. We do not
Mm-hmm.
allow food to become a battleground so that everyone can eat what they want and not eat the things that they may hate. Now, we do require a no thank you bite. We do require good manners at the table. Those are things I think that have helped us a lot in our
Mm-hmm.
strategy. And then when I'm planning meals, I always make sure there's always one or two things that I know my son will eat. And then
Mm-hmm.
outside of that, I'm going to plan for myself and my husband and our preferences.
Mm-hmm. It is getting those, what is firm and what is flexible. It's getting those boundaries right. And I'm personally, struggling, and that is like a moving target in our family. But I love some of those examples of, no battles at the table, but always have manners. Think about how to find wins within meals for our kids. What is something I know most of us are going to enjoy?
Hmm.
Those are really great strategies. I want to talk a little bit more as well about food allergies. So I became a mom for the first time about 10 years ago. And the recommendations today for some of these core allergens are actually really different than they were when I became a mom. So let's start with some of the basics. We know that food allergies are on the rise. Do we know why?
We don't. I think that what we know is that all sort of allergic disease is on the rise. So it's not just
Mm,
food allergies, but it's also asthma and environmental allergies. Those are also on the rise. It probably has something to do with changes in our lifestyle. We know
mm-hmm,
that the genetics haven't changed significantly over the last, several decades, and yet we have seen this rise. So the thinking is it has something to do with our environment or our lifestyles. There's something we're doing differently that has
mm-hmm,
impacted how our bodies respond to the food that we eat.
mm-hmm. That's fascinating.
Hmm.
I've read a bit. I'm not a scientist. I just like to read about this kind of stuff. I've read a bit about how we live in such a clean environment now relative to the way our ancestors grew up. And certainly we're living in a time of, Uber hand washing all the time and making sure we're really protected from other diseases. And yet somehow this, from what I've read, some of this more sterile environment is also affecting our immune system and allergens and things like that in some maybe unexpected, or at least to me, like not obvious ways. Is that true? Is that one of the components?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're describing is called the hygiene hypothesis. And
Mm,
the idea is that our bodies were created to protect us, right?
mm-hmm,
And our immune system is designed to protect us. So it's sort of at the ready all the time to attack any invaders and kill bacteria and pathogens, parasites, etc. But when we're no longer being presented with those challenges, our body is still ready. And there's some thought that perhaps, it's a bit of misfiring, right? It's our bodies think that there should be, it should be protecting us from something, and it mistakes proteins in foods for a pathogen,
mm,
perhaps parasite, et cetera, et cetera. What we know is that there's great research that shows that we are exposed to proteins in all different kinds of ways, right? And including through our skin. So when we think about food allergies in particular, we know that children who have moderate to severe eczema, this is broken skin, right? They've got broken skin. There are proteins in the environment where we live, right? There's protein in the dust in our house. This is weird to think about, but it's true. There's food protein even in the dust in our house and the dust in our beds. So babies who have broken skin are being exposed to that protein through their skin. And the skin is a really important part of our immune system. It actually protects us as a barrier, but it also contains lots of immune cells within the layers of the skin. So if the skin is broken, those proteins can get into the skin and actually activate the immune system to begin the process of reacting to proteins that we wouldn't otherwise react to.
Let me back up for a second. Can you help us to understand what actually is an allergy? And let's focus maybe on what is a food allergy specifically.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that because I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding about what food allergies are, right? So, food allergies, there are lots of different kinds of reactions you can have to food. All of them are not food allergies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, food allergy, as I'm describing, it's really an IgE mediated reaction. IgE is an antibody that our bodies make in response to something. So, it's the sort of chemical messenger that tells our bodies this is foreign and you need to protect yourself from it.
Mm-hmm.
And foods that we eat contain proteins. Most of the time, protein is what triggers this IgE development. And so, if we eat a food that contains a protein that our bodies think is foreign or bad for us, then the body mounts a response. That's an allergic reaction, and that can happen to
Okay.
environmental antigens as well or allergens as well. But with food, it starts in the gut, right? So we eat the food, it starts in the mouth and in the throat and in the gut.
Mm. Let's walk through the process of a mother and her child experiencing allergies or attempting to ward off potential food allergies. So, for example, when you are pregnant, are there recommendations about being exposed to certain foods as a pregnant person? Then, when you maybe are nursing, what about introducing first foods? Walk me through some of these core stages and what mothers can do to, prevent allergies or even to anticipate them if perhaps there's a family history.
Yeah, so we're still learning. There are a lot more questions than answers when it comes to
Mm,
food allergies. I think that's one important thing to recognize. And I will say that, as I was talking about sort of that IgE mediated reaction, reactions to foods, food allergy reactions can look very different. They can actually affect any organ system. So it
mm,
can be anything from having hives on the skin to vomiting to even very severe potential life-threatening reactions. It can be very mild or it can be very severe. So it is a life impacting, life altering thing when someone gets diagnosed with a food allergy or has a food allergy reaction. So the most important thing we can try to do is prevent it. So I'm glad that you
mhm,
asked that question, thinking about from the beginning, what can we do? We're still learning. There's a lot we don't know, as I said, but I would say that what we know is that if you have a family history of allergy, then you should probably start talking to your pediatrician about that early when you have a baby, right? So let the pediatrician know about that. But as far as pregnancy and breastfeeding and those kinds of things, what we know is that those can't definitively prevent food allergy at this point. So there's no research that supports the idea of withholding or eating any
mm,
particular food to prevent food allergy, either while you're pregnant or when you're breastfeeding. So I always recommend a liberal diet. So as long as you like the food and the food is, and you don't have a food allergy, eat all the
mhm,
foods, eat all the foods. And what we know too about food allergens is the most common food allergens, right? So there are 8 foods that cause about 90% of reactions in the US. So that's milk, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, wheat, and soy. And recently, sesame was added as the ninth most common
mm.
allergen. But all of those foods, if you think about them, those are all really nutritious foods, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, they're the foods that we
Yeah.
actually want to be eating more often. So I
Yep.
always tell people, don't avoid those foods unless you have a problem with them when you're pregnant or when you're breastfeeding.
Okay. And what about introducing those to your child? As I said, I think when I first, for example, when I first became a mom almost 10 years ago, eggs, you were not supposed to introduce eggs early. And that was according to the American Academy of Pediatrics out of fear of an egg allergy. Um, totally get that. And it seems that some of that science has emerged that for those who are, not high risk for an egg allergy, it's better to introduce early. So, can you walk us through some of those core moments of early introduction or not when it comes to preventing allergies when you're really starting to introduce nutrition to your child?
Yeah, for years we thought that, and I think that was the conservative thinking was that if you withheld those foods, then you were less likely to trigger an allergy in a child who was susceptible to that. And we don't really even understand completely who are the people who are susceptible to developing allergy. We know that there are some risk factors that we can identify, but many children who go on to develop food allergies had no known risk factors. So what we know is that in infancy, well, what we thought was by withholding it, we might prevent an allergy. But
Right.
after decades, we realized, of course, that that doesn't work. It doesn't prevent it. We were still seeing this steep increase, even though most parents were not introducing eggs or peanuts or many of the other allergens in that first year. And then in about 2008, a study was published that linked eating peanut foods early with a reduced risk of allergies. And that research changed the approach from the American Academy of Pediatrics, who at that time actually said, no, there's no reason to withhold these foods, but they didn't actively tell people to feed the babies those foods because that evidence didn't exist yet either.
Right.
And then in 2015, a study was published called the LEAP study, Learning Early About Peanut, that actually showed that when we introduce peanut foods to babies early, starting at around 4 to 6 months, these babies in particular who are at high risk, and you mentioned high risk, so babies who are at high risk either because they already had existing egg allergy or because they had moderate to severe eczema, which we talked about the skin barrier, if those children were introduced to peanut foods early, there was up to an 86% reduction in peanut allergies. Huge, huge intervention.
Hmm. I mean, that's pretty, groundbreaking. First of all, that the paradigm changed from let's totally avoid these foods out of, fear for provoking an allergy to, oh, the growing evidence shows that by, safely introducing these foods earlier, children can I'm not a scientist, but like children grow a tolerance for that food instead of having a heightened reaction somewhere down the line. It's so interesting. And living through this as a parent, sometimes you're like, I thought I was doing the right thing. And now, we're being recommended to do something else. For those who are high risk, do you recommend that they work through that introduction process with their pediatrician?
Yeah, absolutely. So if a child does have already existing allergy, if they've already been diagnosed with one allergy in that first year, or they have severe to moderate eczema, or they have eczema that started very early and has been
Mm-hmm.
persistent,
Mm-hmm.
definitely talk to the pediatrician first, just to
Mm-hmm.
get an idea of what they recommend in the way of safety. There is a chance that even before a child has eaten the food, they may develop an allergy. Remember what I was talking about the skin, that sort of skin exposure. So we
Mm-hmm.
want to make sure that the child doesn't already have an allergy before they start to eat the food. But as long as they're clear to start, once a baby starts eating solid foods, you can go ahead and start adding these allergens in an infant safe way. And that includes
Mm-hmm.
all the allergens. The
Mm-hmm.
most evidence is on peanut and egg right now. So peanut and egg, you definitely want to get in
Mm-hmm.
early with the pediatrician's blessing. Now, most children are not going to be high risk. That's the other thing to remember is that most children are not going to be high risk. They're not going to have eczema. Somewhere around 25% of babies have eczema.
Mm-hmm.
Most of those babies are not going to have very severe eczema. So most of those babies, even if they have mild eczema, that's not considered a high risk. If they have already an existing allergy, you want to do a bit of a stepwise pattern, but for most other kids, not going to be an issue. And one of the other beautiful things about doing this allergen introduction is, to me, what we talked about earlier is that allergens, these allergenic foods are super nutritious.
Right.
They're delicious, but they're also packed with nutrition. And
Mm-hmm.
so getting those foods into the baby's diet, ensure that they're going to be eating enough protein, that they're getting lots of other vitamins and minerals that may be hard for them to get from other foods.
You work, I'm sure, with many parents who face, food allergies and other kinds of allergies. And, our family, we don't have those kinds of allergies, but my friends who do, it is really an enormous burden. And I know for many of them, it's scary because they're worried about their child's health. What do you think those of us who just want to be supportive of the people in our lives who are raising children with food allergies, what can we do to better show them that we care, that we're there for them, that we respect their journeys? Because I know it's a lot to handle when your kids are really struggling with these allergies.
Yeah, it is. And there's some research that shows that moms in particular carry a huge burden of managing food allergies and the anxiety associated with food allergies because you never know when that very severe reaction is going to happen, and life-threatening
Mm-hmm.
reactions do happen. And
Mm-hmm.
while death due to food allergies actually pretty rare, it's still a possibility. And so even if
Mm-hmm.
it's rare, if it's your child, that's very,
Right.
very scary and it can be debilitating. So I would say, as a friend, what we need to do is let our mom friends know, hey, I understand this is an issue for you. I don't understand exactly how you feel, but I'm here. If you want to talk about it, if there's something I can do to help you, please let me know. You can
Mm-hmm.
educate yourself about food allergies. If you've got the opportunity to help them with their child, be a safe place for their child. That's, I think, a
Mm-hmm.
really great opportunity. A lot of parents who have children with food allergies avoid social situations. They don't allow their children to eat at other people's houses. They may not allow their child to spend the night at other people's houses. So these children don't always have some of the most typical experiences of childhood because their parents are so concerned about keeping them safe. So if
Mm-hmm.
you can provide a safe household by partnering with them and helping them, that goes a long, long way.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with some of the basics. Where do you even begin with introducing some of these foods to your little ones? I know that, at least for me, introducing foods and getting to eating real food can be a really stressful time. You're worried about choking, you're worried about allergies. What are those steps that you recommend parents take in making food a healthy and not stressful experience for the whole family?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important things is to make sure the child is ready. So
Mm,
when we think about introducing solid foods, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends exclusive breastfeeding or formula for the first 6 months and then introduce solid foods for most babies. Now, if the child is high risk, there may be benefit to introducing a little bit earlier, so around 4 months, but that's something to discuss with the pediatrician. In any case, when you're introducing any food, whether it's an allergen or it's not, you want to make sure that the baby's ready, right? So, are they holding their head up well? Are they able to sit up on their own without a lot of support?
hmm
Are they showing an interest in solid foods? Are they, sometimes babies will start chewing with you. They may not have anything in their mouth, but they'll be chewing right along with you. They may lean in to try to get a
hmm
bite of whatever you're eating. Those are signs that a baby's ready to start solid foods. And you can start in a lot of different ways. Baby-led weaning is very popular now. But
hmm
for years, women and men, anybody who's feeding a baby has used purees.
hmm
A combination of those two things works really well, I think. But you want to make sure that the texture is right, that you're not introducing in the case of peanuts, you don't want to give a baby whole nuts. That's not
hmm
safe. You don't want to give them a big glob of peanut butter. That's not safe either. But you can take peanut butter, which most households already have anyway, thin it with a little breast milk formula, and give it to the baby. That's a perfectly safe way to feed a baby peanut for the first time.
Mm,
You can also you can mix the same kinds of things into puree. So if you're feeding the baby cereal, like infant safe cereal, you can add a little bit of peanut butter. 2 teaspoons is what's considered a serving. So give them 2 teaspoons of peanut butter, mix it into their puree, like applesauce or cereal, or you can use powdered peanut butter. That's another safe way to do it. Or you can use puffs. There are a lot of puff products now on the market that have peanut in them, baked
mm,
into them, and they just melt in the baby's mouth.
mhm.
Or if the baby's very young and you want to use that method, you could even melt that with a little bit of breast milk or formula as well.
Okay, those are really, really helpful. I wish I had some of that. I introduced my very first kid, his first meal was steel cut oats. And I will never forget, this is the very first thing I fed him. He looked at me like, what are you doing? And now I realize they're like little balls of oatmeal. And he went
Yeah.
from never eating food. What was I thinking? But, we learn along the way. I wish I had those steps when I was trying to figure out how to feed my little guy the first time. I
Uh,
total amateur.
yeah,
But
now you're a pro.
those are super helpful. Okay, so you have spent a career studying not just nutrition but also all these acute issues that families have. I also imagine that you've come up with some pretty good hacks along the way. I recently got into using the air fryer myself, and make oatmeal on Sunday nights in the crock pot. All those kinds of things you do along the way to make it a little easier to eat healthy when you're a busy family. You got to have some tricks up your sleeve. Can you share some of them with us that you've
Sure.
used in your daily life?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that those are great tips that you just mentioned. And I think, prepping ahead is one of the keys to, I think, being prepared for the week ahead, right? So I use some time on the weekend, either Saturday or Sunday as my schedule allows, to usually bake a batch of muffins, because muffins are the kind of thing like everyone will eat muffins. If you put a chocolate chip in it, they'll eat it. It doesn't matter what's in it.
So
And
with the
sometimes my muffins have,
yeah, do you put some healthy stuff in those muffins? I want to hear. I
yeah,
want to hear the real hack there. Okay, good.
yeah, absolutely. So whole grain muffins. So I use whole wheat flour, usually add some oatmeal, sometimes quick oatmeal, sometimes whole rolled oats, just depends on what I have. I add shredded carrots or zucchini to the
Wow.
muffin batter. I will add, you can use pureed or canned pumpkin. That's another one. Again, those are like packed with nutrition. They taste great. They keep the muffin nice and moist. Oftentimes, make banana muffins. I add peanut butter. Sometimes I use peanut butter as the frosting for the muffin, and now
Mm-hmm.
it's a cupcake. Magic. I think that's something that I do almost every single week.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I do is when I come home from the grocery store, as often as possible, I'll go ahead and wash and prep the vegetables. So I'll go ahead and wash them, cut them up into whatever size I think I'm going to need, and then put them into containers so that they're ready to go, recipe
Mm,
ready when the week comes. I don't make all of our dinner meals ahead, but I do prep as much as I can in advance so that those onions are already cut up, the carrots are already chopped,
mm.
that kind of thing, so I can just toss it into whatever I'm going to make during the week.
Those are really, really good tips. I don't always, actually, I rarely do that when I get home from the grocery store, but every time I do it, I think this is a game changer to rinse the tomatoes and get it all ready. It's about just taking a little bit more time to think ahead when you have the time, maybe on the weekends, because it does make the day to day so much easier. And
And it
really,
reduces food waste.
oh, tell me more about that because that's a challenge for our family for sure.
Well, I mean, if the food is already ready to eat, you're much more likely to eat it. If you have to actually, so if, when it comes snack time, for instance, at 3:30, 4 o'clock, my son is home from school and he starts to whine about being hungry. I'm hungry. I'm hungry, and dinner's still an hour and a half away, and I don't want to give him a lot of a snack, but if I've
Mm-hmm.
got carrot sticks ready to go, I can give him some carrot sticks and some peanut butter, and he's ready to go. Or
Mm-hmm.
I can give him, if I've got, celery ready, he can have celery and hummus and he's ready to go. So I think that, that's kind of one of the things is just having those things ready. We're more likely to eat them.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes time to make dinner, if I need a quick side, if the broccoli's already chopped up and washed, I can just toss it into a pan with some onions and some garlic and some olive oil, a little, sprinkle of red pepper flakes, and we're ready to go. That's
Mm-hmm.
like, an easy side that took no effort. But if I had to take, an additional 3 to 5 minutes to wash and chop and, that I may be less likely to do. And
Mm-hmm.
then it goes to waste, right? I end up throwing it away because nobody wants slimy broccoli.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Taking a step back for a moment, we've talked about a lot of tactics about how to raise healthy eaters, how to deal with, difficult moments, food allergies, those kinds of challenges many of us face. I'm wondering, there has to be like a greater reason for our food. And there is a reason that there is a lot of stress around what we eat and how we gather as a family. What does the family meal mean to you? And, what have you learned about your family by putting a big emphasis on that time you spend together eating?
Well, I mean, I think that you've alluded to exactly what it is in my mind, and that is that time together. It's about togetherness. It's about, it is about feeding us well and nourishing our bodies physically, but to me, it's much more about that emotional connection, right? I grew up in a household where food was really important and we gathered together regularly, and my grandmother was sort of the matriarch of our family, and she made beautiful biscuits and she cooked with a loving hand. And for me, it's the same thing, right?
Mm,
My family comes to the table. We have an opportunity to experience a delicious meal together. I mean, every meal is not delicious, I'm not going to lie, but most of the meals or many of the meals are delicious. They're nourishing our bodies, but they also give us the opportunity to sit together, to talk about the day, to practice good manners, to appreciate each other. And everyone at our table also has a job, right? So I'm the cook and I prepare the meals, but my son gathers the napkins and the forks, and my husband takes care of the drinks. And then when we sit together, we say grace together. It's an opportunity for us to just connect around a time that's dedicated. We don't allow devices. We don't, there's no distraction. We don't have TV. It's our opportunity to be together.
mm. You talked about your grandmother. You said she cooked with a loving hand. What do you mean by that? And if you could maybe expand on that, because I think that really does describe, many mothers are the primary cook in their households. They cook with loving hands. What are you saying underneath that?
Well, I think, she always, well, first of all, I remember her hands, her physical hands, just because that was a source of love and loving touch. And so I think, when she touched the food, it felt like the love transferred from her hands into the food. But
Mm,
I think she always prepared food in with the person who was going to eat it in mind, right? So she made our favorite things. She knew what everyone loved. She made the things that we love to eat. And I want my family to experience that too. Some meals I make for myself, like nobody likes eggplant but me.
mm,
Sometimes I make caponata or I make eggplant parmesan because I love it. But most of the time, I make the foods that I know my family will like to eat.
mm,
It's about, and sometimes it's a healthier spin on those foods, right? But it's the foods that I know make them feel warm and safe and loved because I made it for them.
mm. At Motherly, we believe that motherhood brings out our superpowers. So those are, things about us, powers within us. Often we don't know those superpowers are there until we become mothers ourselves. So I'm curious, what do you think is your superpower?
Hmm. Gosh, that's such a great question. I would say that my family would say that my superpower is probably my snuggles. I think, we are a very affectionate family, and I think my son's love language is physical touch.
Mm,
So, he is like the first one to want to snuggle in the morning. We make time in the morning for snuggles on the couch. We make time in the afternoon for snuggles on the couch. And again, sort of like the meal time, throughout the day, we have these periods of connection point, that are dedicated times to connect.
hmm
So in the morning, first thing we do that. And then after school in the afternoon, we do that. And then at mealtime, at dinner, we do that again. It's just an opportunity to connect.
mm, that's beautiful. Well, Sherry Coleman Collins, thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise and joining us on the Motherly podcast.
Thank you for having me.